Nightfall painted the Nebraska sky in bruised hues of purple and gold as Nora Winters ran for her life through the dense cornfield, her lungs burning with each desperate breath. The rustling stalks behind her grew louder. Her pursuers were gaining ground. Blood trickled from the gash on her forehead, blurring her vision as tears streamed down her dirt-smudged face. Just when her legs threatened to give way beneath her, a deep voice called out from somewhere ahead, "Keep running toward my voice." The words sliced through the approaching darkness like a beacon. "This way, miss. Don't stop." Nora had no choice but to trust the stranger. The alternative waited behind her 3 men who would surely kill her for what she'd witnessed at the train station. With renewed determination, she pushed forward, following the commanding voice that continued to guide her through the endless rows of corn. "Left, 20 more yards," the voice directed. "You're almost there." Breaking through the final row of cornstalks, Nora stumbled into a small clearing where a man sat atop a magnificent Palomino horse. His face was partially hidden beneath the brim of his Stetson, but she could make out a strong jaw dusted with stubble and eyes that assessed her quickly. "Take my hand," he commanded, extending his arm down to her. Nora hesitated only a moment before the sounds of pursuit grew louder. She reached up, and in one swift motion, he pulled her onto the horse behind him. "Hold tight," he instructed as she wrapped her arms around his waist. The horse surged forward just as 3 men burst from the cornfield, their guns drawn. Without looking back, the stranger spurred his mount to a gallop, and they disappeared into the growing darkness, leaving her pursuers shouting curses into the night. "Name's Brock Callahan," he said over his shoulder as they rode. "And you, madam, are in a world of trouble." The year was 1876, and Nora Winters had just become the most wanted woman in Webster County. They rode hard for what felt like hours, the rhythm of the horse's hooves matching Nora's pounding heart. She clung to this stranger, this Brock Callahan, her savior, and possibly her only hope of survival. The moon had risen high in the sky by the time he finally slowed the Palomino to a walk. "There's a creek up ahead," Brock said, his voice low and gravelly. "We'll rest there for a spell, let the horse drink." Nora nodded against his back, too exhausted to speak. Her entire body ached, and the events of the day played in an endless, horrifying loop in her mind. The train station. The argument, the gunshot, the blood. Running when they reached the creek, Brock dismounted in one fluid motion, then reached up to help her down. Her legs buckled beneath her, and he caught her by the arms, steadying her. "Easy now," he murmured. In the moonlight, she could see him clearly for the first time, tall and broad-shouldered, with features that might have been handsome if not for the long scar that ran from his right temple to his jaw. His eyes, though, were kind of startling blue that reminded her of summer skies. "Thank you," Nora managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Those men would have killed me." "I reckon they would have," Brock agreed, leading his horse to the water's edge. "Mind telling me why Jasper Holcomb and his boys are hunting you like a wounded deer?" Nora stiffened. "You know them." "Everyone knows Holcomb. He owns half the county and thinks he owns the other half too." Brock knelt by the creek, cupping water in his hands to drink. "What I don't know is what a lady like you did to earn his wrath." Nora sank to the ground, suddenly aware of how she must look, her once fine blue dress torn and mudded, her auburn hair falling from its pins, blood dried on her face. "I saw him murder a man," she said simply. "At the Red Cloud station. A dispute over cattle prices, I think. The other man, I didn't know him, said something that angered Holcomb, and he just shot him right there on the platform." Brock cursed under his breath. "And he saw you witnessing it." "Not at first. I hid behind some crates, but when I tried to slip away, one of his men spotted me." She shuddered at the memory. "I ran, they followed. I've been running ever since until—" She looked up at him. "Until you called out to me in the cornfield." Brock was quiet for a long moment, seeming to weigh his options. Finally, he sighed. "Well, Miss Winters, Nora Winters." "Miss Winters, you've managed to make an enemy of the most dangerous man in these parts. Those men won't stop hunting you. Holcomb can't afford to have witnesses." Fear clutched at Nora's heart. "What am I to do? I was on my way to my uncle's farm near Hastings." "I don't know anyone else in Nebraska territory." Brock rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. Hastings is 2 days' ride from here and Holcomb's men will be watching the roads. He glanced at her, assessing. I've got a cabin, it's remote up in the hills. You'd be safe there while we figure out what to do about your situation. Nora echoed, surprised by the offer from this stranger. A hint of a smile crossed his face. I've got no love for Jasper Holcomb. Man killed my brother 3 years back. Called it self-defense, but Thomas never carried a gun a day in his life. His expression hardened, been waiting for a chance to see justice done. Nora realized she had little choice. She was alone in unfamiliar territory with killers on her trail. This cowboy was offering shelter and help. Despite the risks of trusting a stranger, her instincts told her he was honorable. Thank you, Mr. Callahan, she said formally. I accept your offer of sanctuary. Brock, he corrected, offering her his canteen. Drink, we've got another hour's ride ahead of us. As they continued their journey through the night, Nora wondered what twist of fate had brought her to this moment, fleeing for her life with a scarred cowboy who seemed to have stepped straight out of one of the dime novels she secretly enjoyed reading. The daughter of a Boston banker, she had been raised to be a proper lady, to marry well, to host dinner parties. Nothing in her 22 years had prepared her for this. Yet here she was, her arms wrapped around a stranger's waist, heading into the unknown Nebraska wilderness, a wanted woman with a price on her head. Dawn was breaking when they finally reached Brock's cabin, nestled in a small valley between two pine-covered hills. It was a simple structure: log walls, a stone chimney, a small porch with a rocking chair. A corral stood empty nearby and a stream bubbled past not 50 yards from the door. It's not much, Brock said as he helped her dismount, but it's sturdy and warm. It's perfect, Nora replied honestly. After the night she'd had, any shelter seemed like a palace. Inside, the cabin was neat and surprisingly cozy. A stone fireplace dominated one wall with a rocking chair and small table before it. A bed covered with a patchwork quilt stood in one corner, a trunk at its foot. A simple wooden table with 2 chairs occupied another corner, near shelves stocked with provisions. Everything was clean and orderly, not what she had expected from a bachelor's dwelling. You keep a tidy home, she observed. Brock shrugged as he lit a lamp. My ma taught me that just because a man lives alone doesn't mean he has to live like an animal. He gestured to the bed. You take that, I'll sleep by the fire. I couldn't possibly. You can and you will, he interrupted firmly. You've been through hell, Miss Winters, rest. I'll make us some breakfast. Too exhausted to argue, Nora sank onto the edge of the bed. She removed her torn boots, wincing at the blisters that had formed. She hadn't run so much since she was a child playing tag with her cousins in their summer garden. Brock busied himself at the stove, his back to her, as he prepared a simple meal of cornbread and coffee. The domesticity of the scene struck Nora as oddly comforting after the terror of the previous night. Mr. Callahan, Brock, she began hesitantly. Why are you helping me? You're risking your life for a stranger. He turned, studying her with those intense blue eyes. Like I said, Holcomb killed my brother, but even if he hadn't. He paused, searching for words. My pa used to say a man's character is measured by what he does when no one's watching. I couldn't live with myself if I'd just ridden past that cornfield knowing someone needed help. The simple honesty of his words touched her deeply. In Boston, men spoke eloquently of honor and chivalry in drawing rooms while sipping brandy. But here was a man who lived those values without fanfare. Well, I'm grateful, she said softly. Truly, he nodded, a slight smile lifting the corner of his mouth. Eat, then sleep. We've got planning to do later. After a breakfast that tasted better than any fine meal she'd had in Boston, Nora stretched out on the bed and was asleep almost instantly. She dreamed of cornfields and running, of gunshots and blood, but through it all, a steady voice called to her. Keep running toward my voice. When she woke, the light filtering through the cabin's small windows told her it was late afternoon. She sat up, disoriented for a moment before the memories flooded back. Brock was nowhere to be seen inside the cabin, but a basin of clean water and a bar of soap had been placed on the table, along with a folded shirt and pair of trousers that would clearly be much too large for her. Grateful for the chance to clean up, Nora washed her face and hands, wincing as the soap stung the cut on her forehead. She managed to make some sense of her tangled hair, pinning it back as best she could with the few pins that remained. After some consideration, she decided to change into the offered clothing. Her dress was beyond salvation, torn and stained with dirt and blood. She had just finished rolling up the sleeves of the oversized shirt when the door opened and Brock entered, carrying an armful of firewood. "You're awake," he observed, setting down his burden. If he was surprised to see her in his clothing, he didn't show it. "How's the head?" "Better, thank you." Nora touched the cut gingerly. "I hope you don't mind, my dress was ruined." "They suit you," he said with a hint of amusement. "Though we'll need to find you something more fitting soon enough." He moved to the stove, stoking the fire and placing a pot of water to heat. "I've been thinking about your situation. Holcomb's men will be searching every town and settlement between here and the Kansas border. Your best chance would be to reach the marshal in North Platte. He's an honest man, not in Holcomb's pocket. You could give testimony and he could arrange protection until a proper trial." "North Platte, how far is that?" "About 100 miles northwest, 3, maybe 4 days hard riding." Nora's heart sank. "I've never ridden more than an hour at a time. I'm not sure I could manage such a journey." Brock studied her thoughtfully. "We've got time. Holcomb doesn't know about this place. I can teach you to ride properly while we wait for things to calm down a bit. A week or 2 of practice and you'll be ready." "A week or 2, Nora echoed, surprised by the offer of extended hospitality. He shrugged. "Unless you've got a better plan." She didn't. The reality of her situation was stark. She was a woman alone in a dangerous territory, hunted by powerful men. Her original destination, her uncle's farm, would surely be watched. She had no money, no transportation, and no skills that would serve her in this wild country. "No," she admitted. "I don't have a better plan, but I can't impose on you for so long." "It's no imposition. I could use the company." There was something in his tone that suggested loneliness, though his expression remained impassive. "Besides, it'll give me time to teach you a few things you'll need to know to survive out here." And so began Nora's education in frontier living. The following morning, after a breakfast of flapjacks and coffee, Brock led her to the corral where his palomino and a smaller bay mare were grazing. "This is Sundown," he said, patting the palomino's neck, "and the mare is Penny. She's gentle, good for a beginner." For the next few hours, he taught her the basics of riding, how to mount and dismount properly, how to hold the reins, how to communicate with the horse using subtle shifts in weight and pressure from her legs. By midday, Nora's thighs were burning, and she had a new appreciation for the cowboys she'd seen riding so effortlessly. "You're a natural," Brock encouraged as she guided Penny in a slow circle around the corral. "Most city folks take days just to sit comfortably in a saddle." Nora couldn't help the flush of pride at his praise. "I had riding lessons as a child, though we rode side saddle in Boston. This is different." "Side saddle," Brock snorted. "Foolish way to ride, dangerous too. A horse spooks and you're on the ground in a heap of petticoats." "Speaking of petticoats," Nora said hesitantly, "I can't continue wearing your clothes. Is there any way to get some proper women's attire?" Brock considered this. "There's a trading post about 10 miles east, run by an old Frenchman named Baptiste and his Pawnee wife. They might have something that would fit you. We can ride there tomorrow, though you'll need to keep your head down. Word travels fast in these parts." The next day they set out at dawn, Nora riding Penny while Brock led the way on Sundown. Despite her soreness from the previous day's lesson, Nora found herself enjoying the ride. The Nebraska landscape, which had seemed so threatening during her flight through the cornfield, now revealed its beauty: rolling hills covered in prairie grass that rippled like water in the breeze, stands of cottonwood trees along creek beds, wildflowers dotting the meadows in splashes of yellow and purple. "It's beautiful," she breathed, taking in the vastness of the sky above them. "So different from Boston. You miss it." "The city?" Brock asked, glancing back at her. Nora considered the question. "I miss certain things: books, music, my mother's garden." She smiled ruefully. "Hot baths." "Can't help you with most of those," Brock said, "but a hot bath isn't impossible. Got a big copper tub in the lean-to behind the cabin. Just takes time to heat the water." The thought of a proper bath after days of makeshift washing was so appealing that Nora nearly wept with gratitude. That would be wonderful. The trading post, when they reached it, proved to be a low, sprawling building of weathered logs with a wide porch. Several horses were hitched outside, and Nora felt a flutter of anxiety at the thought of encountering strangers who might recognize her from descriptions given by Holcomb's men. Brock seemed to read her thoughts. "Stay close to me," he murmured as they dismounted. "Keep your head down and let me do the talking." Inside, the trading post was dim and crowded with merchandise stacks of furs, barrels of flour and sugar, shelves of canned goods, tools hanging from the ceiling beams. Behind a rough-hewn counter stood an elderly man with a long white beard and a colorful Pawnee woman whose dark eyes missed nothing. "Brock Callahan," the old man greeted in a thick French accent. "It has been too long, mon ami. What brings you to Baptiste's humble establishment?" "Need some supplies, Baptiste," Brock replied casually, "and something suitable for the lady to wear." The Frenchman's eyebrows rose as he took in Nora, still wearing Brock's oversized clothing. "Ah, I see you have found yourself a wife at last. Magnifique." "She's not," Brock began, but the Pawnee woman had already come around the counter and was examining Nora with interest. "Come," she said in accented English, taking Nora's arm. "Flowing Water has things for you." Before Nora could protest, she was being led to a back room filled with bolts of fabric and ready-made clothing. The woman Flowing Water sorted through a trunk and began pulling out various garments. "You are running," she stated matter-of-factly, holding up a calico dress against Nora to check the size. "Men hunt you. Bad men." Startled by the woman's perception, Nora could only nod. Flowing Water nodded as if this confirmed something. "Brock is good man, strong heart, he will protect you." She handed Nora a bundle of clothing. "These will fit. Dress like frontier woman, not city lady. Safer." When Nora emerged from the back room, she was dressed in a simple brown skirt that fell just above her ankles, a cream-colored blouse, and a faded blue shawl. Flowing Water had also given her sturdy boots, undergarments, and a wide-brimmed hat that would help shield her face from both sun and curious eyes. Brock was engaged in conversation with Baptiste, but he fell silent when he saw her. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or appreciation, before he quickly masked it. "Better," he said gruffly. "You'll blend in now," Baptiste chuckled. "She is too pretty to blend in anywhere, my friend." Nora felt her cheeks warm at the compliment, but Brock was already turning back to business, purchasing ammunition, coffee, sugar, and other supplies. When he reached for his money pouch, Baptiste waved him off. "No, no, consider it my gift to the lovely lady." The old Frenchman winked at Nora. "Besides, you saved my grandson from those rustlers last winter. Baptiste does not forget his debts." Outside, as Brock loaded their supplies onto Sundown, Nora noticed a poster nailed to the trading post wall. Her heart nearly stopped when she saw her own face staring back at her, a rough sketch, but recognizable enough. Below the image were the words, "Wanted Nora Winters for murder and theft, $500 reward." "Brock," she whispered urgently. He followed her gaze, his expression darkening. "Holcomb works fast," he muttered, "and he's clever. Accusing you of his own crime, murder and theft. I've stolen nothing. Doesn't matter. It's his word against yours, and his carries more weight in these parts." Brock ripped the poster down, crumpling it in his fist. "We need to get back to the cabin. Now." They rode hard, Nora's newly acquired riding skills tested as they pushed the horses to a gallop once they were clear of the trading post. The sun was setting by the time they reached the safety of Brock's Valley, painting the sky in vivid oranges and reds. "They'll be watching all the roads now," Brock said grimly as they unsaddled the horses. "And with a price on your head, every bounty hunter and fortune seeker in the territory will be looking for you. What am I going to do?" Nora asked, despair creeping into her voice for the first time since her ordeal began. "I can't spend the rest of my life in hiding." Brock's expression softened as he looked at her. "We'll figure it out. I promise to help you, and I will, but for now you're safe here." He hesitated, then added, "I think Baptiste might have mentioned our visit to the wrong ears. We can't risk going into town again." That night, true to his word, Brock prepared a bath for her. The copper tub wasn't large, but filled with steaming water and placed before the fire, it seemed like the height of luxury to Nora. He had even added a handful of dried lavender from a pouch flowing water had included with her new clothes. "I'll be outside tending to the horses," he said, clearly embarrassed. "Take your time." Alone in the cabin, Nora sank into the warm water with a sigh of pure bliss. For a few precious moments, she allowed herself to forget the danger, the wanted posters, the price on her head. She washed her hair and scrubbed her skin until it glowed pink, savoring the faint scent of lavender that reminded her of her mother's garden. When she emerged from the bath, dressed in a clean nightgown also provided by flowing water, she found Brock had left a mug of hot tea on the table for her. The simple kindness brought unexpected tears to her eyes. He returned later to find her sitting by the fire, her damp hair loose around her shoulders, staring thoughtfully into the flames. "Feel better?" he asked, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "Immeasurably," she replied with a grateful smile. "Thank you, Brock, for everything," he nodded, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Got some rabbits for tomorrow's stew," he said, changing the subject, "and I've been thinking about your situation. We need evidence against Holcomb, something concrete that would make the marshal believe your word over his." "The only evidence was my eyes," Nora said glumly, "and I doubt that will be enough." "Maybe not." Brock sat in the chair opposite her, "but what if there were other witnesses? Someone else might have seen what happened at the station." Hope flared briefly in Nora's chest. The station was crowded. There were at least a dozen people on the platform when it happened. "And most of them probably scattered when the shooting started," Brock reasoned. "But even one supporting witness would strengthen your case." He leaned forward, his expression intent. "Do you remember anything about the man Holcomb killed? His name, where he was from?" Nora closed her eyes, trying to recall details from that chaotic scene. "They called him Miller, I think. Or Mills. He was arguing about cattle prices being too low, said Holcomb was cheating the small ranchers." "That sounds like Frank Miller," Brock said, his expression grim. "He owned a small spread south of Red Cloud, decent man, has a wife and 2 young children." The knowledge that she had witnessed the murder of a family man made Nora's heart ache. "His poor family," she whispered. "All the more reason to see Holcomb brought to justice," Brock said firmly. "Tomorrow we'll start working on a plan, but for now you should rest." As had become their routine, Nora took the bed while Brock made his pallet near the fire. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. She was acutely aware of the man sleeping just a few feet away, this stranger who had risked everything to help her, who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect. In the quiet darkness, she allowed herself to acknowledge what she had been trying to ignore. She was drawn to Brock Callahan in a way she had never experienced before. It wasn't just gratitude, though she certainly felt that in abundance. There was something about his quiet strength, his unwavering moral compass, his gentle consideration that touched her deeply. Such feelings were dangerous, she knew. She was a woman on the run with a price on her head, and Brock was a man with his own past, his own pain. The scar on his face spoke of violence endured. The loss of his brother hinted at deeper wounds. She had no right to complicate his life further with inappropriate attachments. Yet as she drifted finally toward sleep, her last conscious thought was of blue eyes that reminded her of summer skies. The days fell into a pattern. Each morning they would rise at dawn, share a simple breakfast, and then Brock would continue Nora's riding lessons. In the afternoons, he taught her other skills: how to build a fire, how to read animal tracks, how to find north using the stars. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, talking long into the night. Nora shared stories of her life in Boston, her father's banking business, her mother's social ambitions, the suitors who had courted her with flowery words and empty promises. Brock spoke less readily of his past, but gradually, pieces of his story emerged. He had been born in Kentucky, the son of a horse breeder. When his father died, leaving debts, the family farm was sold. Brock and his younger brother Thomas had headed west, drawn by stories of opportunity and open land. They had settled in Nebraska territory, working as cowboys until they saved enough to stake a claim on the land where Brock's cabin now stood. Thomas was the dreamer, Brock said one night, his voice soft with memory. Wanted to breed horses like our pa, had an eye for bloodlines, could gentle the wildest stallion. He was the one who found Sundown, just a half-wild colt back then. What happened? Nora asked gently, though she suspected she knew the answer. Brock's face hardened. Holcomb happened. 3 years ago, he started buying up land, pushing out small ranchers. When we refused to sell, things got ugly. Thomas went into town one day for supplies. Holcomb picked a fight. Shot him in cold blood, then claimed Thomas drew first. His hand unconsciously touched the scar on his face. I wasn't there. By the time I got to town, Thomas was dead and Holcomb's men were waiting for me. That's how you got the scar, Nora realized. He nodded. 5 against 1. I'm lucky I walked away at all. Sheriff did nothing. Judge was in Holcomb's pocket. No justice for Thomas. I'm so sorry, Nora whispered, her heart aching for his loss. Been waiting 3 years for a chance to bring Holcomb down, Brock said, his eyes meeting hers across the firelight. Maybe you're that chance, Nora Winters. As the days passed, Nora's riding improved dramatically. She could now sit confidently in the saddle, guiding Penny through complex maneuvers with ease. Her body grew stronger, her skin tanned by the Nebraska sun. The spoiled Boston debutante was fading away, replaced by a woman who could start a fire with one match, who could identify edible plants, who no longer flinched at the sight of Brock skinning rabbits for their dinner. And something else was changing too, something between them. It was in the way his hand lingered when helping her mount Penny, in the way her heart raced when their fingers brushed while washing dishes. It was in the long conversations by the fire, in the comfortable silences, in the shared laughter over small domestic mishaps. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the hills in gold, Brock turned to her with an uncharacteristically hesitant expression. Nora, he began, there's something I need to ask you. Her heart skipped a beat. Yes. If we manage to clear your name when we clear your name, he corrected himself, what then? Will you go back to Boston? The question caught her off guard. She hadn't allowed herself to think that far ahead, focusing instead on survival. But now, faced with the choice, she realized she already knew the answer. No, she said softly. There's nothing for me there anymore. My father arranged a marriage for me before I left to a man 30 years my senior with a fortune to match his cruelty. It's why I was heading to my uncle's farm. I was running away. Surprise flickered across Brock's face. You never said. It seemed trivial compared to running for my life, she replied with a small smile. But no, I won't return to Boston. As for what comes after. She looked out at the sunset, at the wild beauty of the land that had once terrified her but now felt more like home than the civilized streets of Boston ever had. I don't know. I suppose I'll have to find my place in this new world. Brock was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. You could stay. Here, I mean, if you wanted to. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Nora turned to look at him, finding his blue eyes intent on her face, vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. Brock, she whispered, her heart pounding. Are you asking me? A gunshot shattered the twilight stillness, the bullet splintering the porch rail mere inches from Nora's head. Brock reacted instantly, tackling her to the floor of the porch as more shots rang out. Inside. He hissed, pulling her toward the cabin door. They've found us. They scrambled into the cabin as bullets thudded into the log walls. Brock barred the door, then grabbed his rifle from above the fireplace. Stay down, he ordered, moving to a window. He peered cautiously through a gap in the shutters. 3 riders, Holcomb's men most likely. Fear clutched at Nora's heart. How did they find us? Someone must have talked, Baptiste maybe, though I doubt he'd do it willingly. Brock's expression was grim as he checked his ammunition. They'll wait until dark, then try to rush the cabin. What do we do? Nora asked, trying to keep her voice steady. We need to get to the horses, Brock said. There's a back way out of the valley, a narrow trail through the hills, but the corral is exposed. We'd be easy targets trying to reach it. Another volley of shots peppered the cabin. One bullet found its way through a window, shattering a ceramic mug on the table. "Listen to me," Brock said urgently, kneeling beside her. "There's a trapdoor under the bed leads to a root cellar. If things go wrong, you get down there and stay hidden. There are provisions, water, even a small tunnel that comes out behind the ridge. You follow that, then head northwest toward North Platte. Find Marshal Davis, tell him everything." "I'm not leaving you," Nora protested, gripping his arm. "Nora," he said softly, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "I lost someone I loved to Holcomb once. I won't lose you too." Before she could respond, he leaned forward and kissed her a brief, fierce claiming that left her breathless. Then he was on his feet again, moving back to the window. "I'll create a diversion," he said, his voice now all business. "Draw their fire to the front while you slip out the back to the corral. Get Penny and Sundown ready. I'll join you when I can." "Brock," Nora began, but he cut her off. "No arguments. We've got one chance at this." His eyes softened briefly. "Trust me," and she did. Despite the fear, despite the danger, she trusted this man with her life, with her heart. Moving to the back of the cabin, Nora gathered their few essentials: ammunition, food, canteens of water into saddlebags. She changed quickly into her riding clothes, securing her hat firmly on her head. "Ready?" Brock asked, positioning himself by the front door. Nora nodded, her throat too tight for words. "When I start shooting, count to 20, then run for the corral. Don't look back, don't stop for anything." He met her eyes one last time. "Keep running toward my voice, I'll find you." With that, he flung open the door and began firing rapidly, moving onto the porch with a shout. The attackers returned fire immediately, their attention focused entirely on the front of the cabin. Nora counted to 20, her heart thundering in her chest, then slipped out the back door. Crouching low, she ran for the corral, the gunfire at the front of the cabin masking the sound of her footsteps. She reached the corral gate, fumbling with the latch with shaking hands. Penny and Sundown were agitated by the gunfire, but they knew her now, trusted her. Working quickly, she saddled both horses, securing their saddlebags and checking the cinches twice as Brock had taught her. The gunfire at the cabin had intensified. Peering around the corner of the small stable, Nora could see muzzle flashes in the growing darkness. Brock was still on the porch, using an overturned table as cover, but the attackers had spread out, working to flank the cabin. "Come on, Brock," she whispered urgently. "Please." As if he had heard her, he suddenly made a dash from the porch, firing as he ran in a zigzag pattern toward the corral. The attackers shouted, their bullets kicking up dirt around his feet, but somehow he reached her unscathed. "Mount up," he ordered, swinging into Sundown's saddle. "Ride hard and don't look back." They burst from the corral at a gallop, heading for a narrow gap between two hills that Nora had never noticed before. Behind them, the attackers scrambled for their horses, shouting curses. The trail was treacherous in the fading light, steep and rocky, barely wide enough for a single horse. Penny followed Sundown without hesitation, picking her way sure-footedly along the dangerous path. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter as they climbed higher into the hills. They rode through the night, the moon providing just enough light to see the trail. Brock set a punishing pace, pushing the horses as hard as he dared on the difficult terrain. It was nearly dawn when they finally stopped at a small hidden spring to rest the exhausted animals. "We've lost them for now," Brock said, dismounting stiffly, "but they'll pick up our trail come daylight." Nora slid from Penny's back, her legs so numb she nearly collapsed. Brock caught her, steadying her with strong hands. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his eyes scanning her for injuries. "No, just tired." She leaned against him, too exhausted to maintain her independence. "Where are we going?" "North Platte is still our best option," Brock said, leading the horses to the spring. "But we'll need to be careful. Holcomb's reach is long, and now he knows you're with me. That makes him twice as dangerous." "I'm sorry," Nora said softly. "I've cost you your home." Brock turned to her, his expression intense in the pre-dawn light. "A cabin can be rebuilt. What matters is that you're safe." He hesitated, then added, "What I said back there before the shooting started. I meant it, Nora, if you wanted to stay. With me." Her heart swelled with emotion. Here, in this wild place, with danger all around them, she had found something she never expected a man worth risking everything for. "I want to stay," she whispered. "More than anything." He kissed her then, under the fading stars, with a tenderness that belied his rugged exterior. His arms around her felt like safety, like home, like a promise of something she had never dared to hope for. When they finally broke apart, Brock rested his forehead against hers. "Then we'd better make sure we both survive this," he said with a small smile. They allowed themselves and the horses only a brief rest before continuing northward. Brock chose their path carefully, avoiding main trails and settlements, keeping to the high ground where they could spot pursuers from a distance. By midday, they had covered a significant distance, but the horses were tiring, and both Nora and Brock were struggling to stay alert after a sleepless night. When they came upon an abandoned line shack, a simple one-room structure used by cowboys watching distant herds, Brock decided they would risk a few hours' rest. "It's not ideal," he said as they approached the weathered building, "but we need sleep, and so do the horses." The shack was dusty but intact, with a small wood stove, a rickety table, and a narrow cot. While Brock tended to the horses, hiding them in a stand of cottonwoods behind the shack, Nora swept the dirt floor and checked the stove for functionality. "No sign of pursuit," Brock reported when he returned, "but we shouldn't stay more than a few hours." They shared a cold meal of jerky and hardtack from their saddlebags, too tired for conversation. When they had eaten, Brock insisted Nora take the cot while he kept watch. "You need rest too," she protested. "I'll wake you in a few hours," he promised. "Then you can watch while I sleep." Too exhausted to argue, Nora stretched out on the cot. Despite her fatigue, sleep wouldn't come immediately. Her mind raced with the events of the past days, the attack on the cabin, the desperate flight through the night, Brock's declaration and her response. "Brock," she said softly into the dim interior of the shack. He was seated by the window, rifle across his knees, his profile silhouetted against the afternoon light. "When this is over, when we're safe, what then? What kind of life could we have?" He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful, tinged with a warmth that made her heart ache. "I've been thinking on that. The cabin's gone, likely burned to the ground by now, but the land is still mine. We could rebuild, maybe something bigger. Proper bedrooms for children if you wanted them. A garden for you, since you mentioned missing your mothers. I've got some money saved enough to buy a small herd to start. Could breed horses too, like Thomas wanted." The simple, domestic vision he painted brought tears to Nora's eyes. It was so different from the life she had been raised to expect: no grand houses, no servants, no social seasons, yet it seemed infinitely more appealing. "I'd like that," she whispered. "Very much." His smile, visible even in the dim light, was worth every hardship she had endured. "Sleep now," he said gently. "We've got a long road ahead." This time, sleep came quickly, Brock's words painting dreams of a future she was determined to claim. True to his word, Brock woke her a few hours later. The light outside had shifted to late afternoon. He looked exhausted, the strain of their flight etched in the lines around his eyes. "Your turn to keep watch," he said, handing her his revolver. "Wake me at dusk. We'll travel by night again." Nora took her position by the window, watching as Brock stretched out on the cot, asleep almost instantly. In repose, his face softened, the habitual wariness easing from his features. The scar that ran from temple to jaw seemed less harsh somehow, a mark of survival rather than violence. She kept her vigil diligently, scanning the surrounding landscape for any sign of movement, any hint of pursuit. The prairie stretched out before her, vast and empty, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. It was beautiful in its wildness, in its uncompromising harshness. Like Brock himself, she thought with a small smile, the sound came suddenly, the distant thunder of hoofbeats growing louder. Nora's heart lurched as she spotted riders on the horizon, moving fast toward the shack. "Brock," she called urgently, moving to wake him. "Riders coming." He was instantly alert, on his feet and reaching for his rifle. "How many?" "5, maybe 6, Nora reported, returning to the window. "Coming from the south." Brock joined her, his expression grim as he assessed the approaching threat. "Holcomb's men, most likely. They've picked up our trail faster than I expected." He turned to her, his decision made. We can't outrun them on tired horses. We'll have to make a stand here. The reality of their situation hit Nora with terrifying clarity. They were trapped, outnumbered, with only the flimsy walls of the line shack for protection. Can we fight them off? She asked, striving for calm. Maybe. Brock didn't sugarcoat the odds. The shack gives us some cover and they'll have to approach in the open. He handed her his revolver again. You know how to use this. Point and pull the trigger, Nora said, hoping she sounded more confident than she felt. A brief smile touched his lips. There's more to it than that, but that'll do for now. He moved around the small space, positioning the table on its side for additional cover, checking sight lines through the windows. Stay low and only shoot if you have a clear target. We need to make every bullet count. The riders were closer now, clearly visible as they approached the shack. Nora could make out details: 5 men, heavily armed, riding hard. Callahan, a voice bellowed as they drew near. We know you're in there. Send out the woman and maybe we'll let you live. That's Wes Harper, Brock muttered. Holcomb's foreman, mean as a rattlesnake and twice as deadly. What do we do? Nora whispered. We hold our ground, Brock replied, his voice steady. They want you alive. Holcomb will want to make sure you can't testify against him. That gives us an advantage. They'll be cautious. The riders had stopped about 50 yards from the shack, spreading out to surround it. Harper called out again. Last chance, Callahan. The boss wants the woman unharmed, but he didn't say nothing about you. Brock's answer was a carefully aimed shot that unseated one of the riders, sending him tumbling to the ground, clutching his shoulder. The others scattered, diving for cover behind rocks and depressions in the ground. That'll keep them honest, Brock said grimly, working the lever on his rifle to chamber another round. The standoff began in earnest, then a tense exchange of gunfire as Harper's men tried to work their way closer to the shack, while Brock's accurate shooting kept them pinned down. Nora remained at her window, the revolver heavy in her hand, watching for any threat Brock might miss. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the prairie when Harper tried a new tactic. Fire, he ordered his men. Burn them out. A flaming arrow arced through the air, landing on the shack's roof with a soft thud. Another followed, and another. The dry wood caught quickly, smoke beginning to curl through the gaps in the ceiling. We need to move, Brock said urgently. The whole place will go up in minutes. Where? Nora asked, panic rising in her throat. They've got us surrounded. Brock's eyes met hers, determination burning in their blue depths. Remember what I told you back at the cabin about running toward my voice? He took her hand, squeezing it tightly. That's what you're going to do. I'll create a diversion, draw their fire. You make for the cottonwoods where the horses are hidden. Don't stop, don't look back. No, Nora protested. I won't leave you, you have to, he insisted. Someone has to reach the marshal, tell him what Holcomb did. It has to be you. The roof was fully ablaze now, burning debris beginning to fall around them. They had moments, not minutes. Brock, please, Nora begged, tears streaming down her face. Come with me. He kissed her then hard, desperate, a kiss that tasted of smoke and fear and love. I'll find you, he promised against her lips. No matter what happens, I will find you. Before she could argue further, he moved to the door, rifle ready. When I start shooting, count to 5, then run. Southeast corner, straight to the cottonwoods, pennies saddled and ready. He looked at her one last time. I love you, Nora Winters. Then he was gone, bursting through the door in a hail of gunfire, shouting challenges to draw the attacker's attention. Nora counted to 5, each second an eternity, then ran as she had never run before out the back of the burning shack, across the open ground toward the cottonwoods. Gunshots cracked behind her, but none seemed aimed her way. Brock's diversion was working. She reached the trees, finding Penny and Sundown exactly where Brock had left them. Acting on instinct and adrenaline, she untied both horses. If when Brock escaped, he would need Sundown. She mounted Penny, took Sundown's reins, and whispered a prayer. The gunfire behind her had intensified. Smoke billowed from the shack, now fully engulfed in flames. She couldn't see Brock, couldn't tell if he was still fighting or if he had fallen. Keep running toward my voice. His words echoed in her memory, giving her the strength to do what she knew she must. turning Penny's head northward, toward North Platte and the marshal who represented their only hope for justice. Nora rode into the gathering darkness, sundown following behind. She rode through the night, pushing Penny as hard as she dared, stopping only when necessary to rest the horses. Her mind replayed the scene at the shack, endlessly Brock's last words, his desperate plan, the kiss that might have been their last. Had he escaped? Was he following her? Or had Harper's men? No, she couldn't allow herself to think that way. Brock was alive, he had to be. He had promised to find her, and in the short time she had known him, she had learned that Brock Callahan kept his promises. Dawn found her still riding, her body aching with fatigue, her eyes gritty from smoke and unshed tears. The landscape had changed subtly, more hills, fewer trees, the grass shorter and more sparse. She was nearing the Platte River, Brock had told her. North Platte would be just beyond. It was mid-morning when she finally saw the town in the distance, a collection of buildings nestled in a bend of the river, with a church steeple rising above the rest. Safety, justice, perhaps even revenge for all that Holcomb had taken from her and from Brock. She rode directly to the marshal's office, a solid brick building on the town's main street. Dismounting on legs that threatened to buckle beneath her, she secured both horses to the hitching rail and pushed through the door. Inside, a tall man with iron-gray hair and a neatly trimmed mustache looked up from his desk, surprise registering on his weathered face at the sight of her filthy, exhausted, still smelling of smoke. "Marshal Davis," Nora asked, her voice hoarse from smoke and disuse. "That's me," he confirmed, rising from his chair. "And you are Nora Winters." She saw recognition flicker in his eyes. "And before you reach for those wanted posters, you should know that Jasper Holcomb is a liar and a murderer. I've ridden 2 days to tell you the truth." To his credit, the marshal didn't immediately reach for his gun or the handcuffs hanging on the wall. Instead, he studied her thoughtfully, then gestured to a chair. "Why don't you sit down, Miss Winters, before you fall down, and then you can tell me this truth you've ridden so far to share." Nora sank gratefully into the offered chair. "It started at the Red Cloud station," she began. "I saw Holcomb murder a rancher named Frank Miller in cold blood." She told him everything: the murder, her flight, Brock finding her in the cornfield, the weeks at his cabin, the attack, the burning line shack, Brock's sacrifice to ensure her escape. The marshal listened without interruption, his expression growing more grave with each revelation. "That's quite a story," he said when she had finished. "And ordinarily I might be skeptical, but I've had my eye on Holcomb for years, never been able to make anything stick." He leaned forward. "Do you have any evidence to support your claims, anything beyond your word?" Nora's heart sank. "Only Brock's testimony if he—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The marshal nodded, understanding. "Well, it so happens I've got something that might help your case. 2 days ago, a woman came to see me, Sarah Miller, Frank's widow. She said her husband had been keeping records of Holcomb's cattle theft operation. Prices, dates, names. He confronted Holcomb with this information at the Red Cloud station. Hope flared in Nora's chest. "The records, do you have them?" "Mrs. Miller has them hidden at her farm." "I was planning to ride out there today to collect them." Marshal Davis stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "With those records and your eyewitness testimony, we might finally have enough to bring Holcomb to justice." "Then let's go," Nora said, starting to rise despite her exhaustion. "Now." The marshal raised a hand. "Hold on, Miss Winters. You're dead on your feet, and Holcomb's men are likely still searching for you. I suggest you get some rest while I send a deputy to the Miller farm. There's a room above the office where you'll be safe." Though every instinct urged her to keep moving, to take action, Nora had to admit the marshal was right. She could barely stand, let alone ride any further. "What about Brock?" she asked, her voice breaking. "He could be hurt or captured or—" "I'll send riders back along your trail," Marshal Davis promised. "If Callahan is out there, we'll find him." It was the best she could hope for. Nodding wearily, Nora allowed the marshal to lead her to the small room above his office. It was sparse but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. "Get some sleep," the marshal advised. "When you wake, we'll make our plans." Despite her worries, despite the ache in her heart for Brock, Nora fell into an exhausted slumber the moment her head touched the pillow. She dreamed of cornfields and burning cabins, of gunshots and kisses, of Brock's voice calling to her through darkness. "Keep running toward my voice." She woke to fading daylight and the sounds of activity in the street below. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back: the escape, the ride to North Platte, her conversation with Marshall Davis. Brock, where was Brock? Rising quickly, she washed her face in the basin of water someone had thoughtfully left on the washstand. Her reflection in the small mirror was startling. A stranger looked back at her, with tangled hair, sunburned cheeks, and eyes that had seen too much. The proper Boston debutante was gone, perhaps forever. Downstairs, she found Marshall Davis in conversation with a young deputy. Both men looked up as she entered. "Miss Winters," the marshal greeted her, "feeling better after your rest?" "Yes, thank you," she replied, though in truth she felt hollow with worry. "Any word from your riders about Brock?" The marshal and deputy exchanged a glance that made her heart constrict painfully. "We found the burned-out line shack," the deputy reported. "Signs of a fierce gunfight. Blood on the ground, but no bodies and no sign of Callahan or Harper's men." "What does that mean?" Nora asked, clinging to hope. "It means the fight moved elsewhere," Marshal Davis said carefully. "My men followed the trail as far as they could. It looks like there was a pursuit heading northeast, away from your route to North Platte." "Brock could have escaped," Nora reasoned, desperately needing to believe it. "He could be alive, trying to find me." "It's possible," the marshal agreed, though his tone suggested he thought it unlikely. "But right now, we need to focus on gathering evidence against Holcomb. My deputy just returned from the Miller farm with this." He placed a leather-bound ledger on the desk between them. Opening it, Nora saw page after page of meticulous records: dates, numbers, names, amounts. Even to her untrained eye, it was clearly documentation of a large-scale cattle rustling operation. "Frank Miller was thorough," the marshal said with grim satisfaction. "This, combined with your testimony about his murder, gives us enough to arrest Holcomb." "When?" Nora asked. "Tomorrow." "I've sent telegrams to the territorial judge and to the sheriffs of neighboring counties. We'll need all the legal authority we can muster to take down someone as powerful as Holcomb." The plan was sound, Nora had to admit. Yet something bothered her, a nagging sense that they were missing something important. "What if Holcomb destroys other evidence before you can arrest him?" she asked. "Or what if he flees?" The marshal frowned. "That's a risk, certainly. But we need the judge's warrant to make this arrest legal and binding." "And how long will it take for the judge to arrive?" 2 days, perhaps 3. 3 days. 3 days in which Holcomb could escape justice. 3 days in which Brock, if he was still alive, remained in danger. "That's too long," Nora said firmly. "Holcomb needs to be taken by surprise before he can prepare." Marshal Davis studied her with newfound respect. "What exactly are you suggesting, Miss Winters?" "I'm suggesting we don't wait for the judge. We go to Holcomb's ranch now tonight with your deputies and whatever other lawmen you can gather. We catch him unawares." "That's a risky proposition," the marshal said slowly. "Without a warrant, you have an eyewitness to murder," Nora interrupted. "You have documentary evidence of criminal activity. Most importantly, you have the element of surprise. Once Holcomb learns I've reached you, he'll either run or prepare for a fight on his terms." The deputy, who had been listening silently, spoke up. "She's right, Marshal. Holcomb's got eyes and ears everywhere. It won't take long for word to spread that she's here." Marshal Davis stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "It goes against procedure," he mused, "but in this case procedure might get people killed." He looked at Nora, his decision made. "All right, Miss Winters, we'll do it your way, but you stay here where it's safe." "No," Nora said immediately. "I'm coming with you." "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous." "Marshal Davis," Nora said, leaning forward intently, "I've been running from Holcomb for weeks. I've been shot at, chased, and nearly burned alive. I watched the man I love sacrifice himself so I could reach you with the truth. I will not hide while others risk their lives to bring Holcomb to justice." The marshal held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. You can come as far as the ranch perimeter, but when the arrest happens, you stay back with my deputy. It was a compromise Nora could accept. When do we leave? After midnight. Holcomb and his men should be asleep by then, less chance of bloodshed. The hours that followed were a blur of preparation. The marshal assembled a posse of 6 deputies and trusted townsmen. Weapons were checked, horses prepared, plans made. Through it all, Nora's thoughts continually returned to Brock. Was he alive? Was he searching for her as he had promised? Or had Harper's men? No, she wouldn't allow herself to believe the worst. Not yet. Not until she had seen Holcomb brought to justice. They set out just after midnight, a somber procession of riders moving silently through the moonlit prairie. Nora rode Penny, with sundown trailing behind, a silent reminder of the man who had saved her life in the cornfield all those weeks ago. Holcomb's ranch lay 20 miles south of North Platte, a sprawling operation with a large main house, bunkhouses, barns, and corrals. They approached from the east, using a stand of trees for cover as they surveyed the quiet ranch. No sign of extra guards, the marshal observed in a whisper. That's good, means they don't know we're coming. The plan was simple: surround the main house, call for Holcomb to surrender, and hope he chose not to resist. If he did resist, the marshal's men were prepared for a fight. "Remember, Miss Winters," Marshal Davis said firmly as they prepared to move in, "you stay here with Deputy Jenkins until I give the all clear." Nora nodded reluctantly, watching as the marshal and his men spread out, approaching the ranch house from all sides. The night was still, the only sounds the distant lowing of cattle and the soft hooting of an owl. Then all hell broke loose. The front door of the ranch house burst open, men pouring out with guns blazing. They had been waiting, prepared for the raid. The marshal and his men dove for cover, returning fire. "It's a trap," Deputy Jenkins hissed, pulling Nora deeper into the trees. "Someone must have warned them we were coming." Gunfire echoed across the ranch yard, the flashes of muzzle fire illuminating brief tableau of violence, men crouching behind water troughs, others firing from windows, bodies falling. "We have to help them," Nora said, reaching for the revolver Brock had given her, which she still carried. "The marshal ordered us to stay put," Jenkins protested. "The marshal expected the element of surprise," Nora countered. "That's gone now, they're outnumbered." Before the deputy could stop her, she was moving through the trees, circling around to approach the ranch house from the rear. Her heart pounded in her ears, nearly drowning out the sounds of battle, but her hands were steady on Brock's revolver. The back of the ranch house was less heavily defended, with only a single guard watching the rear door. Nora took careful aim, as Brock had taught her, and fired. She missed the guard but struck the door frame beside him, causing him to dive for cover. Using the distraction, she darted from the trees to the shelter of a small shed, then to the back porch of the house itself. The guard had disappeared, fled, or gone to join the main fight. She couldn't tell. The back door was unlocked. Taking a deep breath, Nora slipped inside, finding herself in a large kitchen. It was empty, everyone apparently having gone to join the gunfight at the front of the house. Moving carefully, she made her way toward the sound of voices coming from what must be the main room. "Can't hold them off much longer, boss," someone was saying urgently. "There's too many of them." "We don't need to hold them off indefinitely," a cold voice replied, a voice that made Nora's blood freeze. "Jasper Holcomb. Just long enough for me to get to the border. Mexico's less than 3 days hard riding." Peering cautiously around the doorframe, Nora saw 2 men, one tall and distinguished-looking, with silver hair and cold eyes, the other younger, nervous, a bleeding wound on his arm. Holcomb and one of his men, preparing to flee while their associates fought and died outside. Anger flooded Nora, anger for Frank Miller, for Brock's brother Thomas, for Brock himself, for all those who had suffered at this man's hands. Without conscious thought, she stepped into the doorway, Brock's revolver leveled at Holcomb's chest. "You're not going anywhere," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. Both men whirled to face her, shock evident on their faces. "The Winters woman," Holcomb breathed, recovering quickly. "I thought Harper had dealt with you." "He tried," Nora replied coldly. "He failed, as have you." Holcomb's eyes flicked to the gun in her hands, then back to her face. "You won't shoot me," he said confidently. "You don't have it in you. You're a lady, not a killer." "I was a lady," Nora corrected him, "before you and your men hunted me like an animal. Before you burned down the home of the man I love, before you murdered Frank Miller in cold blood." The younger man began to edge sideways, perhaps thinking to flank her. Nora swung the revolver toward him. "Don't move," she ordered. Then to Holcomb, "Tell your man to stop or I'll shoot him first, then you." Something in her voice, the absolute conviction, perhaps made Holcomb believe her. "Stay still, Parker," he commanded. "Now both of you on your knees," Nora continued. "Hands behind your heads." "You think this changes anything?" Holcomb sneered even as he complied. "I own this territory. I own the judges, the politicians. You think your testimony will matter, a hysterical woman probably making up stories for attention. It's not just her testimony you need to worry about, Holcomb." The new voice from behind Nora made her heart stop, then race with wild hope. She didn't dare take her eyes off Holcomb, but she knew that voice would know it anywhere. Brock Callahan stepped into the room, his rifle trained on Holcomb and Parker. He looked terrible, his clothing torn and blood-stained, a fresh cut above his eye, his face gaunt with exhaustion, but he was alive, gloriously, wonderfully alive. "Callahan," Holcomb said, his confidence finally slipping. "Harper said he'd killed you." "Harper was mistaken," Brock replied grimly. "About many things." He moved to stand beside Nora, his presence warm and solid and real. "You all right?" he asked her softly. "I am now," she whispered, tears threatening to spill. The front door burst open and Marshal Davis entered, his gun drawn. Taking in the scene, Holcomb and Parker on their knees, Nora and Brock covering them, he lowered his weapon slightly. "Well," he said dryly, "seems I was worried about the wrong person's safety." The fight outside had ended, the marshal's deputies having overcome Holcomb's men through superior tactics, if not numbers. Holcomb and Parker were handcuffed and led out to join their captured associates. "The judge will be here day after tomorrow," Marshal Davis told Nora and Brock as they stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching the prisoners being loaded into wagons. "With your testimonies and the Miller ledger, Holcomb will hang for sure." "What about his men?" Brock asked, his arm around Nora's shoulders, as if he couldn't bear to let her go now that he had found her again. "Most will go to territorial prison," the marshal replied. "A few of the younger ones might get leniency if they testify against Holcomb." He looked at Brock curiously. "How did you find us anyway? My men searched for you after the Line Shack incident." "I led Harper and his remaining men on a wild chase northeast," Brock explained. "Lost them in a thunderstorm near the Loop River, doubled back toward North Platte, figuring that's where Nora would have gone. Got to town just after you'd all left for Holcomb's ranch. Wasn't hard to follow your trail." The marshal nodded, impressed. "Well, you two have earned a rest, and probably a reward once the territorial governor hears about this. Holcomb's been a thorn in his side for years." "We don't need a reward," Nora said, looking up at Brock with a smile that held all her heart. "We have everything we need." The marshal laughed, understanding. "I'll leave you two alone then. We'll head back to North Platte at first light." When he had gone, Brock turned to Nora, taking both her hands in his. In the light of the rising sun, she could see the full extent of his injuries, cuts, bruises, a bullet graze along his ribs. But his eyes, those summer sky eyes, were as bright and clear as ever. "I thought I'd lost you," she whispered, reaching up to touch his face to reassure herself that he was really there. "I promised I'd find you," he reminded her softly, "no matter what happened." "How did you escape the Line Shack? The deputy said there was blood, not mine," Brock assured her. "Well, not most of it. Harper and his men were so focused on me that they didn't notice you slip away with the horses. I managed to wound a couple of them, then broke through their line when the shack's roof collapsed. Took Wes Harper's horse when he went down. And you came for me," Nora marveled. "Despite everything, I'd ride through hell itself to find you, Nora Winters." His voice was rough with emotion. "I meant what I said back at the cabin before all this started, if you wanted to stay with me." "I meant what I said too," she replied, her heart so full it might burst. "More than anything." He kissed her then, beneath the rising sun, with a tenderness that spoke of homecomings and new beginnings. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "with Holcomb gone, there'll be a lot of unclaimed land opening up. Good land with water and grazing. A man with a little money saved could stake a fine claim. And build a house," Nora suggested, smiling through her tears. "With proper bedrooms for children if wanted, and a garden," Brock added, his arms tightening around her. "Since you mentioned missing your mothers, it sounds perfect," she whispered. "Absolutely perfect." 2 years later, on a warm spring evening, Nora Callahan stood on the porch of her home, watching as Brock rode in from checking the herd. Their ranch was modest compared to some, but it was thriving 30 head of cattle, a small but growing herd of quality horses, a vegetable garden that was the envy of neighboring homesteaders. The house Brock had built with his own hands stood proud on a gentle rise overlooking a creek, 2 stories of solid logs, with a stone chimney, glass windows brought all the way from St. Louis, and a wide porch where they sat in the evenings, watching the sunset. As Brock dismounted and led Sundown to the barn, Nora placed a hand on her swollen belly, feeling the child within kick vigorously. Their first child had arrived a year after their marriage, a strong boy they had named Thomas, after Brock's brother. This second child, the doctor assured them, would be a girl. Life wasn't always easy. The Nebraska weather could be brutal, with blistering summers and blizzard-filled winters. The work was constant and often exhausting, but they had built something precious, a home, a family, a future. Nora often thought about the night she had run through that cornfield, terrified and alone. How a voice had called out to her from the darkness, "Keep running toward my voice." She had run toward that voice, toward Brock, toward a life she could never have imagined in her Boston drawing room. And she had found, in this wild land with this good man, everything she had never known she wanted. As Brock approached the porch, his face lighting up at the sight of her as it always did, Nora smiled. She had spent her life running toward his voice, and she would spend the rest of it running toward their future together.